What is your best they can't send us all to detention story? 3 minutes after the buzzer signaling the start of class, my biology teacher would lock the classroom door so that people who arrived late couldn't sneak in. If you arrived after the 3 minutes you would have to wait in the corridor until he decided you had suffered enough shame. One day we all turn up to class on time and the door is unlocked, so we go in and sit down. There is no sign of the teacher, so we wait. After 5 minutes he still has not turned up, so someone decides to turn the tables. We all decide this would be hilarious, so one of the boys locks the door and we just sit around and chat. The teacher turns up a couple of minutes later and tries to get in, but cannot, and starts knocking on the door telling the boys to unlock it. They refuse, and he goes to the security office to get another key. The boys then unlock the door and the teacher returns. We were expecting him to get really pissed off, but fortunately he saw the funny side of it, laughed it off, and he never locked the classroom door again. In high school we had a big tradition of wearing costumes the Friday of Halloween. My senior year they banned costumes and said any students found will get a detention. I said fuck it, and I went as my GTA V character, a cowboy with a thick Russian accent. By the way, I'm Russian and I live in rural US. A friend went as Marty McFly. Long story short, everyone went with normal clothes as costumes. List of outfits: axe murderer, fighter, pilot, greaser, doo-wop girl with the greaser, motorcycle rider, gangster, some character from American Horror Story, Jason Brody with tattoo, and more. Nobody got a detention. One as whole teacher tried, but we argued this is what we always wear. True for Marty McFly. Edit. Also forgot when half the class were freshest. The desks were set up in a C pattern, and when the teacher had his back turned one kid would do it, and when another would do it on the other side. We all missed lunch. March 20th, 2003. I was a foreign exchange student in Germany as a 7th grader. Germany as a whole was extremely against Bush starting a war with Iraq, so in early March, it started to circulate the school that, if the war would in fact start, everyone would walk out in protest. March 20th came, and the 11th and 12th graders sounded the alarm. The entire school streamed out in a gigantic mob. They tried to lock us in, but it turns out that you really can't prevent 500 kids/teenagers from going somewhere, so doors were forcibly held open and people jumped from the first story windows. Everyone took the public transportation to the middle of the city, where our school met up with 3 other school bodies and we marched through the streets. I remember, my class was supposed to have music that day, so we all got our recorders out and blew them as loudly and off-key as possible. As the American foreign exchange student, it was definitely a bit awkward to be ditching school to protest my own country, but I definitely didn't want to make myself a social outcast by being one of the only ones to stay behind, and I was personally also against the war, so I got over that pretty quickly and enjoyed the adventure and a day without classes. The protest was over 2 or 3 hours later, and everyone just went home, even though school was long from over. The next day a few teachers gave us lectures, but that was the extent of it. Who knows, maybe the instigators got bigger punishments, but us little 7th graders were left alone. That was the first time in my life that I ever protested something, and it was honestly extremely empowering, even as a foreign exchange student protesting my own country XD. At around 15 I discovered the greatest implement of mischief I could bring to school was a Phillips head screwdriver. After spending a productive morning taking the screws out of everything I could find, notice boards, toilet cubicles, etc., I decided it was time to move up to dismantling the desks. There was one kid always the last into class, so I duly whipped out all the screws holding his desk together, leaving them hanging by just a hair, half a thread just enough to stop it collapsing under its own weight. Teacher's already there, in he comes, and crashes to the ground in a pile of metal and timber. Mass hilarity ensues. Happy with the outcome, and with the support of my peers I spent my lunch break doing all the desks in the room we'd be in for the next class. Teacher comes and sits down. I left her one alone. We all file in straight-faced and all come crashing down. She seemed to not be too fazed by the Monty Python-like scene unfolding in front of her, people shouting indignantly this place is falling apart etc. Gave us 15 minutes to sort this mess out, and having checked her own chair for structural rigidity carried on with the class, but kept us back 15 minutes to make up for lost time. Normal reporting time was 7+, but on every Thursday, there would be a free block/study block for the first 2 hours of school. This was the case for everyone. The school policy was that on Thursday, you just had to mark your attendance by 9+, which was done by scanning a card. Then the loco discipline mistress quietly changed that rule on some semi-hidden corner of the permanently glitchy school website, with no announcements made to the school. Now the secret rule was that you had to show up by 7+ on Thursdays, like any other day. Anyway, that Thursday came and like half the school ended up 2 hours late. That's more than 200 people. Everyone was thinking, well, this can't mean jack shit. What are they gonna do? Send all 200+ of us to detention? Logistically, they couldn't, so they did something way crazier. They gave half the school a mark on the permanent record. For context, you usually have to be late a few times to get a warning, and then late a few more times to get detention, and then get detention a few times to get a permanent mark. That day, this discipline mistress decided nope, half the school will get a permanent mark, even if it's their first offense. Somewhat relevant. In 7th grade we had an old beachy teacher that everyone hated. She constantly talked down to students, called us stupid, and half-assed her lessons. One day we all show up to class, and she tells us to turn in our homework that she assigned us, and if we didn't we will get an automatic Saturday school, kind of like detention, but you come in on a Saturday and pretty much sit in a room doing nothing for 4 hours. The problem was she never gave us the worksheet that we supposed to do, never even mentioned it, so obviously nobody in our class did it, not even the straight A students. So she gave everyone in our class Saturday school despite us all telling her she never assigned us anything. She didn't believe us and was convinced we were all lying to mess with her. We were all upset that we had to come to school on a Saturday and felt it was extremely unfair. Some kids even went to the principal to complain, but nothing came of it. The next day we were all told by our vice principal that our punishment was rescinded because not a single student of hers in any of her classes had done the assignment. She was still convinced that our 120+ of her students spread across 8 classes had somehow gotten together and decided not to do the assignment to mess with her. She did learn though that you can't give literally everyone detention. In middle school English, my friends and I were the jokesters in the class. Anytime we were given an opportunity to perform a skit or record a video, we were writing jokes and laying the class out with laughter. One day, we were tasked with writing a very somber skit, portray the sad story of a poverty-stricken family on Thanksgiving Day, the same day they lose a loved one to an automobile accident. The only requirement was, it could not be a comedy. The teacher looked directly at us. If you attempt to make a comedic sketch about this awful story, you will receive a 0 on this assignment. The assignment was worth 50 points. Immediately after, the teacher proceeded to announce an optional extra credit essay, worth 50 points. My teammates and I all exchanged a skeptical glance. It was like she was daring us. We collectively said fuck it. And we wrote the funniest goddamn sketch about poor people you've ever seen. Halfway through our delivery, the teacher rose to stop us and had to lean against a desk to catch her breath from laughing too hard. She finally interrupted us and informed us we would receive a 0 on the assignment. We took that opportunity to hand in our extra credit essays for a sum total of 0 consequences whatsoever. In college, there was a public speaking class that was a mandatory gen ed class with a final that was 10% of your grade. At the same time, there was a rule that nobody could exempt the final exam. However, there were a few other issues. You had to provide your own Scantron for the final. To prevent cheating, there was a policy that no more tests would be issued after the first one was turned in. The university had no plus or on the grades. I had a 100 average going into the final. Since a 10% drop wouldn't stop me from getting an A in the course, I pre-filled in my Scantron with random answers, mostly A and B, sat down, got my exam, and handed it in before they could finish handing out the exam to the rest of the auditorium, about 350 other students. At first, there was about to be a riot, because according to all the rules, nobody was allowed to take the test. At the same time, the professors knew they couldn't just give everybody a 0 on the final without it opening a Pandora's box of grade disputes. End result, everybody exempted the exam. They could, and they did. My high school had a pretty bogus tardy policy my sophomore year. If you weren't inside the classroom when the bell rang, you had to go up to the office to call your parents and sign up for an ice date. My school was fairly large, multi-story with basement classes and trailers outside. This meant that quite a few poor souls were habitually up to 2 minutes late due to distance and hall traffic. This policy was greatly disliked by both parents and students. It caused parents to have to take time out of work to receive phone calls from school and led to lost class time for the students. It was only in place a week when almost half the school was in ice at least one day a week for the next 3 weeks. The next week was even worse, with students purposefully being tardy to overfill the ice room, to the point where they had to put out tables in the atrium and hallways so the 2 poor ice teachers could see them all. This went on for the entirety of that school year. By winter break, the teachers were fed up with having empty classrooms and having to bring so much work each morning to the ice teachers to distribute. I managed to rack up 3 straight weeks of ice days in 2 days, just because I was tired of running through from the trailers on one side of the school at basement level up to the 2nd floor on the opposite side of the school twice a day, and because I just wanted to sit in silence in ice. The pushback from parents and teachers was amazing, but the school held firm to their policy. But, by the end of the year they announced there would be a new tardy policy in place for next year. We won the war, but we didn't win a single battle, and a few kids ended up being stuck a grade behind because of all the missed class time affecting their grades. I've posted this before and no one believed me, but here it goes again. For my sister's last week of high school they decided to do a food fight. She had some friends come over, and they spent $200 on food, mostly spaghetti, and then took it to school and passed it out to like 10 of her friends. She came and sat next to me at the table and was talking, and I was like, so when are you going to throw it? She said no and just sent it flying. All of her friends started throwing it, and the whole cafeteria broke out into a huge food fight, like one you'd actually see in a movie. After a few minimum the principal came in and broke it up. He walked up to my sister and lifted her up by her arm and then dragged her out. He came back in a few minimum later and was standing by the trash can. One of my good friends was dating her at the time and got pissed when the principal grabbed her, so he asked everyone for their food at the table and loaded it on his tray. He then went through the line and got a bunch of extra sheet loaded on his plate and just dumped all of the dressing on the tray. He went and stood next to the principal and the principal looked at him and said, "Are you going to eat that?" To which my buddy said, "No you are," and slammed the loaded tray in his face, covering him in food. The whole cafeteria stood up and started cheering. I had just started studying in an international school on the East Coast. Being 16 and European, I was quite used to drinking, much against national, state and school policy. A bunch of students arranged a limo party, aka driving around getting drunk in a limo for a few hours. This seemed like a good way to get drunk and not get busted. However, if you gather about 15 to 20 international students, Scandinavian and South American for the most part, who barely know each other, shit is gonna go down. People drank like there was no tomorrow. Everyone was making out, and the Mexicans had brought their homebrew tequila. People proceeded to get fuck-faced, cause a scene yelling out the roof of the limo, and eventually a police chase happened. The limo driver, knowing he had provided booze to a bunch of minors, drove us all back to the school as fast as a limo can go, threw us all out and drove off. A girl had to get pumped out, and we were all super faked as the school was supposed to kick us out. We'd been there a month, and we were all scared shitless. The school somehow convinced the police they would be in charge of the punishment, and we all got a bunch of detention, community service, and a course in the dangers of alcohol. My parents had paid a fortune for me to attend this school, and being middle class, I can't believe how dumb I was to risk it all for 5 drunk hours in a limo. Thankfully the school didn't want the bad rep, so only the Mexicans got kicked out. I was taking videography, drawing flip books and filming them in 8th grade, and my teacher was a handful. But I guess we could be too. At the beginning of every class she would make us sign out sharpies to do our flip books with. One day, right before class ended, she started counting her sharpies and one was missing. She started ranting and raving on how one of us must have stolen it, and how we most likely were going to vandalize something during lunch. She had the damn Sharpie tucked behind her ear. We all saw this, but thought it was kind of funny to watch her flip out. No one said a word until we had been held for 15 minutes into lunch with her berating us and treating us like criminals. When she was told, she did not apologize. She even insinuated that somehow it was still our fault. So at lunch, my friends and I hatched a plan. The next day everyone would walk out 15 minutes early to lunch. Amazingly, we got everyone to agree without tipping off the teacher. And 15 till the end of the period we all stood up at once and quietly left. She was furious. I remember walking past the administration office a few minutes later and hearing the principal tell her, "You can't suspend your whole class." I just chuckled. At my old high school there was a collection of mobile buildings used for languages, French, German, etc. And coincidentally all of my year group were being taught in this group of mobiles at the same time one afternoon. So I'm in one in my German class and our teacher decides for the last 10 minutes we would be allowed to watch a football match. This was during the World Cup, and it was this match which would decide if England could go through to the final, so it was a big deal. When he couldn't get his laptop working, he asked 2 kids to go to another mobile to see if they had gotten the football on. They never came back. He sent 2 more kids. They didn't come back either. Eventually there was 3 kids left in the classroom, including myself. My teacher has finally gotten the football up, so asks me to go get the rest of the class back in. When I got outside, near enough every kid was there, running around screaming. One kid had ripped a wooden board from the steps and was swinging it wildly. 2 kids were making out on the floor. In the middle of it all stood the headmaster, trying his best to yell at kids but getting nowhere. Several teachers were crying. We had a system where, if a teacher couldn't cope, they could call emergency support. Unfortunately on this day, emergency support was required for the emergency support team and eventually there was no one left to help. I went back into the mobile and told my teacher what happened. He put his head in his hands, and I never attended another German class. No kids were ever caught or given detention, because there was just too many of them. Oh man, great times. TLDR, typical English football riot in a school. We had a maths teacher in my 8th grade year. She was actually a pretty good teacher and was also a Kuwaiti refugee during the Gulf War, so she had an interesting story to tell. She also had a reputation for being a stickler for the rules and would give out detentions for the slightest infractions. I actually got in school suspension that year because I had a hard time with maths and kept getting in trouble. Anyway, that's another story. She gave us a simple homework assignment on Monday afternoon. Come to class Tuesday morning with the 2 1cm radius pieces of paper cut out. That's it. You'll need them for the lesson. Of course, 2/3 of the class didn't bother figuring they could do it in a few seconds. The 1/3, including me, that did. She brought out a ruler and ensured they were exactly correct. I was off by 1 millimeter because I quickly did it when her back was turned at the start of class. I was given a stern warning to be more careful, but got away with it. I was one of 2 people in the entire class of 35 students not put on detention that day. It was pandemonium. Parents were calling the school to complain. Several students refused to serve their detention, and of course got in more trouble. The headmaster had to send a letter out to the entire school. He sided with her, of course. She went back to Kuwait the following year as far as I know. Okay, so this happened at a church camp. Let me give you a layout of the area. So we had a huge tent at the top of the place and text to that we're the girls' tents. Further down the place were the boys' tents and a friendship hall. In between the big tent / girls' tents and the boys' tents / hall was a really big forest type area with a bunch of huge trees. At like 3 AM I was walking to the leaders' cabins with 2 others because we were looking for something one of them lost. As we are just outside the cabins, a huge mob of boys are all sprinting and yelling, running towards the forest thing towards the girls' tents. So after I got back to my tent I decided to join. How they would start was someone would yell, "Can I get a yeah?" and everyone would yell yozza, then the chanting started. Hoo arg. Boom. Everyone would sprint towards the forest, where leaders and security were attempting to stop us. The overall goal was to make it up to the girls' tents and pull the tent pegs out of the ground. When we were waiting for the next run to start, someone lit some fireworks. Mind you, they are illegal, but it only started, but didn't go off. After that we started running again and someone let off a confetti cannon, and it looked awesome in the dark night. It was so much fun as we opened fences to get to certain places, trying to stealth our way to the tents. Best night for me in a long time. Would kill to do it again. It was awesome as they couldn't really punish people for trespassing or for just being a nuisance as there were so many of us. The leaders got pretty mad though and tackled some of the kids trying to get through. I know I'm late, but I have a good one. Back in senior year of high school we got assigned a new teacher for sociology class that everyone faking hated. He had been away 10 years on some religious mission and has very strict religious beliefs. Note that this was a Catholic school, but it wasn't strict by any means, and this guy thought he'd come in and give us the iron fist. In his first class he started kicking out of the classroom everyone who talked during class, even if it was for 5 seconds to ask for something. That was my first rough encounter with him as he tried to ridicule me in front of those who were left, and I called him a sheet face, which I honestly don't know how I got away with. We made his life miserable. He borrowed some old books, I'm talking 70 or so years old, from the head priest, and we tore the pages on purpose. We stopped attending his classes and stayed down after recess. We turned all of the tables so they faced the other way around, and we were showing him our backs. The principal and the director of discipline had a meeting with us, and we told them we weren't going to stand any of his bullshit. We all loved the principal as he was very good at dealing with problems, and he was also a great guy. He took over the class for the rest of the trimester, and the nutsack left the school. My high school had a bit of a tradition. Every year on the last day of classes the senior class would collectively skip last period. They'd meet in the parking lot, smoke cigars, and then move through the halls making noise and generally celebrating. The official policy was that this was forbidden, but every year it happened and no one did anything. After 4 years, it was our turn. Everyone talked about it in hushed tones. People had their parents buy them a cigar, or the few people that were old enough bought some and gave them away. The administration told us in no uncertain terms that this wouldn't be tolerated, and some people expressed doubts about going through with it. Then the last day of classes came along. The weather was perfect, and there we were, in the parking lot laughing and smoking. Everyone put their cigars out, no smoking inside, and we started the annual noise making. As we're doing our thing, one of the kids at the back of the group banged a little too hard on the library door and broke the window accidentally. He stayed behind, and people were getting nervous, but he owned up to it right away, so they couldn't give us all detention anyway. Right? Wrong. The entire class got Saturday detention. Attendance was mandatory, or you wouldn't receive a diploma. When I was in my junior year of high school something happened that set this kid off. He started walking around the cafeteria to cool off, but some people started following him. Next thing you know there's about 40 white kids marching clockwise around the cafeteria. Then a couple black kids started marching in the opposite direction and were joined by an equally large group of black kids. The security officer was called and managed to get the marching to stop, but the two groups started shouting at each other. From a distance it looked like a race riot was about to start because they were divided by color and you could hear angry shouting. Inside the crowd though they were angrily shouting, "I respect y'all bro. Wanna get together after school for a basketball game? Now I got homework," and other ridiculous shit. One time, 90% of my school, about 800 students, became a giant stampede and none of the teachers knew what to do. How it began is a little bit blurry in my memory now, but it was something like a friend of mine threw a half-eaten apple at a younger kid who was known for being pretty annoying. He responded by throwing it right back, but it hit someone else in the head. The apple's target had quite a few older friends who began to search for this kid. Over the next 20 minutes, this search amasses more and more people, until about 600 students are all being caught up in the hysteria, and are running round the school like madmen, because the teachers are totally powerless to stop them. They can't physically stop anyone, and even shouting down a loudspeaker won't do anything. One teacher even gets flattened by the stampede, when he stupidly stands still in front of them, and shouts, "All of you stop right now." After another 15 minutes of complete chaos, the kid isn't found. He was hiding in the toilets, and people start to disperse. The school has an assembly next morning about it, but none of the kids take it seriously, as the school has no realistic means of punishing hundreds of children for a small-scale riot. Nobody ever mentioned the one guy who pretty much orchestrated it when teachers or staff were around, and he was forever held as a legend that you couldn't talk about. Let's see junior year. Many honor students in each grade were called out first thing in the morning and put in a bus. The school was taking us to the Capitol to show support of a bill, but didn't tell us or our parents. We get there, are given signs to hold, and no one really cares cause we're out of school, took a 3-hour road trip, and are getting free food. Then we get in the crowd and meet the people against the bill. They're just chilling with signs too. Then our teacher tells our students to push them out of the way, and it wouldn't be bad if we accidentally hit them with our signs. Not cool, right? So me and some friends join the dark side. We get new signs and protest and junk, and when the teachers threaten us, we remind them that they didn't have permission to take us here, not to mention it's probably frowned upon making students support something political and free speech and all. Still got called into the office the next day, but someone's mom was waiting outside just in case, and came in and cursed the principal and dared him to do anything against us. Rest of the year we could basically get away with anything, he was so scared. Not a serious one, but freshman's year we were tired of lunch food, so a senior brought a grill in his truck, and we made hamburgers for lunch. Since we technically didn't leave school property, and there's not a rule about bringing grills to school, we didn't get in trouble. The next year the rule book was updated though. In 12th grade we had our art class on Fridays, cancelled indefinitely because the teachers and therapists and TAs assigned to our block. This was an alternative school, so we had blocks/groups of students. I was in B, which is for the severely troubled/bad behavior kids, but not as severely as Block A, which got their own floor. Decided that we would be better off doing team building exercises and watching inspirational movies about bad kids and school turning to the straight and narrow. What they didn't realize is that the art classes on Fridays were the one time we all managed to get along and release all the shit we went through, since most of us were abused/foster/mentally ill/at risk and troubled in some way. The art classes were literally the only help we got that wasn't awful, humiliating, and judgmental, and we all bonded over them, even if we hated each other in the real classroom. So on the first day they announced it, we were all super mad. We were waiting to be taken to the art room. We all had to be led around by at least 2 security people and all, and we were told about the new policy and that we should all head to the other classroom. Everyone started arguing and protesting about art, and one of the bigger security people said that anyone who wants to follow the rules and not get in trouble can come with him, and the rest could stay in the room and be punished by losing rank. Rank was what decided what/if/when we could eat, what freedoms we had, whether we could piss without someone watching, etc. The whole block decided to stay where they were, and next week we got our art back. So there's this teacher who gives no tests or assignments, at the end of the year asks for an essay he doesn't read, and grades kids on how much he likes them. He's hungover every day. He's a mess. This kid Justin had enough. Justin, sophomore year of high school, is still walking around in electric blue mock neck sweaters. His mom cuts his hair into a quasi mullet. This is in like 2013 or so, and he keeps a life-size model of Buzz Lightyear in his room. He's weird and never talks. One day Justin wrote every illegal thing that teacher should have been fired for in Sharpie all over the teacher's smartboard. The teacher, the following day, convinces his first period class to scrub every bit of the words off with steel wool. The problem is, the steel wool faking decimated the smartboard. The teacher went to administration and told them his entire class in X period vandalized his board with steel wool. Every single kid gets ice, and when they say, "Oh, the teacher made me do it," Administration is like, that's ridiculous. Why would a teacher sit and watch while his smartboard gets vandalized by an entire class, much less encourage them? Classic. Teacher still works there. As far as I know, Justin is bringing Buzz with him to uni. When I was in 11th grade I got pegged for dress code. I remember exactly what I was wearing. Dark green skinny jeans, a black tank top, a Forks leopard fur jacket with leopard print high tops. It was late spring in Ontario, so it was kinda cold outside sometimes, but when you got inside you were warm enough to take off your jacket, so I did. This one teacher who was known to be a stickler for the rules saw me and told me to cover up because she could see my bra straps. I told her I was too warm and that the principal had just walked by me and said good morning without even mentioning my bra straps. She persisted, so I got sassier. I said things like, somebody call Victoria because her secret is out and I'm a minor, you shouldn't be sexualizing me in the first place. She didn't like that. This teacher refused to let it go and stood beside me until I put my jacket back on, but of course when she left I took it right back off and went to tell my friends the story. My friends and I all then devised a plan to go to school the next day wearing tank tops, tube tops, etc. Basically anything that would normally show bra straps. But she decided to skip the bras altogether. Of course the same teacher told us to cover up, and we said, but you can't see our bra straps, so what's the problem? And without giving her time to answer, marched off in a group. She tried to talk to my mom about it, as she knew I was the leader of this group of braless teens. But my mom told her to fuck off, and that if it was anybody's job to monitor what I was wearing, it would be my mother. Never heard from the teacher again. Senior day at my high school. Tradition was that it fell on a Friday. It started about 9 or 10 in the morning and pretty much was an excuse for seniors to dump their books into their cars or their friends' cars and hang out at the football field while getting out of classes. The senior class president slash committee slash whoever was in charge of taking care of senior day had the bright idea of planning enough interesting stuff to last until just under an hour or so before school ended. Another tradition was that, if senior day lasted until the last period of the day started, we could all go home and anyone who wanted to stay for the last class could. Maybe 10 or 20 seniors stayed for the class, the rest of us got out of there as fast as we could. By the time we got into school Monday morning, we found out that senior day had been cancelled for future classes. While the principal couldn't put 600 plus students in detention, he did put the class president slash committee into it for the rest of the very short school year. We later learned that several parents of the kids who stayed for the last class complained loudly about senior day and that we got a choice between leaving or going to a class that would be over by the time we all got there. Officially we weren't told whose parents called, but I know one high school friend's mother did, just because that's the type of person she was. My senior year of high school we started having BBQs in the parking lot on Fridays after school. We'd have steak, chicken, and hot dogs, and listen to music. It was a pretty chill experience aside from the closing ceremony. At the end of each BBQ, we'd blow up a can of baked beans by planting it in the hot coals and waiting around for it to pop. At first, administration was fine with our BBQs until someone on the janitorial staff was on campus long enough to see the bean rocket. We believe that they ratted us out because at our next BBQ, one of the security staff members literally approached our grill while we had food on it and sprayed it with a fire extinguisher. Of course, we were pissed off because as 17 to 18-year-olds the money we pulled for those BBQs was a relatively hefty sum. In order to combat security's interference, we started inviting the teachers we liked to our BBQs and a good 3 to 4 attended that very next week. When security staff showed up again to put our BBQ out, the teachers came to our defense and told security to back off. Security told them we blow things up, and we of course denied ever having blown anything up because that was immature and dangerous. The security staff backed off and left us to our BBQ. I think they believed we wouldn't try to blow anything up if teachers were around. Once the coast was clear, one of the teachers kindly leaned into a friend of mine and asked, "So what do you guys blow up out here?" I know they didn't make that allegation up. We told him and gave him the full rundown. Being a science teacher, he loved it and advised us on how to stay clear of the explosion so we didn't get hurt in the future. For the rest of the year, neither he nor any of the other teachers who attended our BBQ snitched on us for blowing things up on campus. We did it a few more times with them in attendance too. Not really detention, and more of a can't fail us all at once, but anyway, I was in an exam for a module in my final year of uni. The exam counted for 40% of the entire module, and it was, as should be expected for a final year university exam, dead silent. Looking through the paper, I'm working through the questions one by one until, about halfway through, I found a question that really gave me a moment's pause because, somehow, it seemed like two of the answers given, it was a multiple choice section of the paper, were describing the exact same concept. I racked my brains, thinking of any other way the concepts could be described, but to no avail. I put my hand up and noticed that the invigilators were already speaking to other students. Eventually, I passed on my concern about the question, and, surprisingly, the invigilator didn't seem surprised, and just said we are looking into it. Continue with the exam for now, and leave that one blank. So, the exam continues, and as time goes on, more and more students are getting to this puzzling anomaly. Eventually, one of the invigilators at the front makes an announcement that there seems to be a problem with question 34. We'll guess at the number, it was a while ago, and that we should leave it blank for now. Whispering erupts in the exam hall, with students grinning as they now realize that they were, in fact, cleverer than whoever wrote the exam paper. The invigilators sh**ed loudly, and the whispering died down a bit. Then, the man of the hour strides boldly into the exam hall. The man who wrote the exam paper. His face is red, he's puffing, sweating, eyes are bright. He stands up at the front, and, after a brief and hushed conversation with the invigilators, he announces that the question, regardless of what we enter on it, will be marked as correct for everyone. Whispering erupts again. Everyone is talking quietly about this revelation, and this time the invigilators just let it go on uninterrupted for a few minutes before silence begins again. I suspect that module achieved one of the highest first class scores out of the entire course that year. I had an 8th grade algebra teacher at a private school, which was my first and only year at a private school. The math teacher went out of her way to try to embarrass me and call me the public school kid. It really didn't bother me, because I would just make fun of her and make her life a little harder every day with stupid subtleties. But one day we were doing those goddamn whiteboards, where a teacher asks question then everyone puts the answer on the whiteboard and holds it up. I was very confident in my answer, it was right and everyone else had it too. She called me out and said public school over here didn't do the work right, but the answer was correct. So, because the water boy had just come out, and she was wearing a white suit, and had the same haircut as him, I said no, Colonel Sanders, your work is wrong. She didn't say anything, and just handed me a detention slip. Which I flatly said I'm not coming, if you give me that. The rest of the class protested the detention, and one of the girls said, if he has to come after school then we will too. Was pretty bold of all of these generally cowardly, tattletale kids. And the rest of the year, everyone called her Colonel Sanders to her face. Even other teachers. It was some time later that I learned that everyone at the school faking hated the teacher. At my high school the senior class always got to take a day-long trip at the end of the year. Usually the destination of the trip depended on how much money the class raised through various fundraisers. Usual destinations included amusement parks, city trips, etc. My senior class was a bunch of bums who raised next to nothing. To reward our hard efforts, the school decided to have our senior trip be at a park 5 minutes from the school. Obviously this did not bode well with the students, and to make matters worse it rained all day. After about an hour and a half of huddling under trees and terraces trying not to get soaked, a group of about 30 students decided this was bullshit and got the idea to just walk back to school and drive home. Seniors could drive to school and park there. As this group started to leave, word quickly spread around that people were bailing and sneaking out. Of course the teacher saw this group of students sneaking out and immediately tried to stop everyone, threatening suspension and not graduating on time. Now that the information had been publicly broadcast to the entire class that people were leaving the crappy park, it took all of about 5 minutes for it to dawn on us that if everyone left, they couldn't possibly stop us all from graduating. So that's what we did. All 450 students of the senior class walked back to the school in the rain and drove home at 10:30 am. There were no repercussions for anyone, and the school board never picked a senior trip location that close to the school ever again. Similar to a post below, but easily the best thing I was ever a part of in high school. I was in a gifted class with a very random bunch of kids. Different social levels / home lives, but we had pretty much all been stuck together since our middle school gifted program. One particular day we had to have a sub come in because our teacher was called away on a family emergency. We had a bunch of smart kids in there, and even if we didn't all like each other, we could all agree that we hated this sub. So that day, we found out a sub was coming in right before class, so as the bell rang to start class, all of us were already in the room waiting for her to finally show up when the most rebellious of our group came up with the plan to lock the sub out of the room. We couldn't actually lock the door without a key, but the door was one that swung outwards, so when she showed up, 5 minutes late, we had someone hold the door shut while crouching so she couldn't see him through the window. Meanwhile the rest of us hid with the lights off. Now, at first she was like, "Come on, open up, this door shouldn't be locked, and I know there's someone in there, this isn't funny," but eventually she decided that it must be really locked, but we could tell she still wasn't convinced when she told us that she planned to get the VP, and if the door wasn't really locked, students would pay. So she goes to get the VP to unlock door. This room is on the 2nd floor, so we had enough time to make this plan a little more complicated. Before the sub showed up, our evil genius leader told two girls, best friends who had both been in the same class the period before, to go wait in the bathroom until they heard the sub come try to open the door, then slip down to the office and tell them that the room was empty, the lights were off, and the door was locked, just in case we needed some backup for our story. So as soon as the sub left sight of the door, all the students but the door holder slipped out and sat in the hallway, and here come the two girls with the VP up one set of stairs, while the sub takes another set of stairs to go down to the office, where she is told that he had just gone up to the 2nd floor. Now the VP tried the door and found it locked, and while he was finding the right key for the room, the kid holding the door slipped into the teacher's closet area, out of sight. Then the VP unlocked the door, let in the students, and turns to leave when he runs into the sub coming up the stairs with all of her things. This all takes about 20 minutes from the start of class to the door being unlocked, so when the VP spots the sub, he chastises her for being so late and that she should have gone by the office first, all the while she is trying to blame us for tricking her into the thinking the door was locked. The VP gets mad at the accusation, as he had just unlocked the door himself, and how dare she pass blame on to innocent students. Meanwhile the door holder slipped out of the closet, while the VP had words with the sub. Eventually we all got on with class, and no one got in any trouble except the sub, for showing up late. TLDR hated sub, locked her out for 20 minutes, sub got in trouble for being late, kids went free. In 7th grade, a few friends of mine and I decided to pull an April Fool's prank. I went to a small grade school, 30 people in my graduating class, so we figured that as long as every guy in the class helped, no one would get in trouble. We bought Nutella, chunky as peanut butter and hot sauce the day before April Fool's, then got up early the next day to meet inside school to execute our plan. Dodging several teachers and parents along the way, we ventured into the girls' bathroom and went to town, painting the toilet bowls and seats with peanut butter and Nutella, sprinkling in bits of hot sauce for a nice "this person has unhealthy sheets" effect. We then did the same thing in the guys' bathroom. We had successfully made it look like some sheet monster of a human being defecated everywhere in both bathrooms. To us 7th graders, it was a golden prank. As soon as school started, every male student was called to the principal's office. We were all suspended after we cleaned up the mess, so my grade was all girls for 4 days straight. My mom had overheard me talking about the prank the night before on the phone with one of my friends and called in right after we did it. Thanks mom. Looking back, it's still my best grandma school memory. TLDR, My friends and I pulled off a massive fake sheet April Fool's prank in 7th grade, and my mom ratted us out instead of telling us not to do it. We had a substitute teacher that we later discovered suffered from severe schizophrenia. Class started rather normally where we just did the required class walk and did whatever for the rest of the day, being quiet. We can do work for other classes, be on our phones with headphones, sleep, etc. If we talked then it was recorded as per school rules. Well, we finished up our class walk and the sub wanted to tell us a story about her life. Bored and with nothing to do after test week had come and gone, we decided to let her go. First she started talking about her trip to Egypt and gave us a quick history lesson about the ancient Egyptians. So far so normal. Then it quickly went downhill. She started talking about how she was kidnapped and was forced to learn secret runes and numbers to try and decipher some ancient language. She started writing numbers on the board in varying patterns and even wrote out some nonsensical symbols as well. It was not hieroglyphics, Arabic, Thai, just scribbles. She became more and more delirious with her trying to make the connections and trying to convince us that there was some meaning behind everything. Students were getting visibly uncomfortable and I decided to make hay and get us out of there. I stopped the sub politely and told her that it was time for us to go for our routine 10-minute restroom break. I also told her that we were allowed to bring our bags with us due to a recent increase in theft. Again she believed me. I thanked her for her time and told her we'd be back in a bit. We all picked up our stuff and went to the library and waited until the bell rang for lunch. Of course she soon realized what had happened and we were all discovered in the library doing whatever we did, research, reading, sleeping, etc. When asked I told the principal what had happened and that we didn't feel safe around her. Being a man in power and of course not having experienced the mental breakdown of the sub, he decided to give us all detention until he can get some information. When the bell rang for lunch the principal came and suspended every one of us for leaving the classroom, but told us to go along with it as he had discovered that the poor sub had a severe case of schizophrenia. We agreed and we all went to the suspension room where we served our time. The suspension itself was never recorded. Freshman math class, I had the coolest teacher ever. He was 23 and would just shoot the sheet with us. If you finished your work he didn't gaff about what you did in class, as long as it wasn't disruptive. He always let my friend S play on her DS because she would finish all of her work. One day we had a sub who was so old and fat that I couldn't tell if they were a man or a woman. Sub got mad at S for being on her DS when she finished her work. Sub says she must have homework or something to work on. S didn't because she was one of the smartest kids at school and got all her sheet done in the class period. Sub makes S put the DS away. Later on S pulled her DS out again and was sneakily playing under the table. Sub notices and yells at S to give the DS to Sub. S says she'll keep it in her backpack and puts it away. Sub grabbed S's backpack and proceeds to play tug of war with S over it. S let go and the sub went flying backwards on his/her old fat ass. Sub goes to get the school cop. I rally the class to turn the tables into a fort to protect S from the stupid sub. We all then build a tall tower made of tables stacked on their sides. S and I hide in the middle. The school cop comes in and says I would be mad if this wasn't so impressive. S and I only had to clean garbage from campus for an hour as punishment. She ended up moving far away, which made me pretty sad. With her genius and my rabble rousing we could have dominated that school. Had a horrible teacher for college chemistry. Too many stories for today, but here is one. One day the teacher is 10 minutes late. Some students start discussing leaving. By the time that it is 15 minutes past the start, we are in full debate of whether it is or isn't a class policy to consider class cancelled if the teacher doesn't show in X time. By 20 minutes a few of us have convinced the rest of the class that if we leave in solidarity, there is nothing he can do to us all. We pass an attendance sheet and roll out as a class, about 30 students. The next class the teacher explains that he was about 30 minutes late. He's in such a good mood and applauds us for taking initiative, not wasting our time. Some 5-minute pep talk on how he knew we used that time to go study. It's borderline comical. 2 weeks later, this teacher isn't in class again, and it's approaching the 15-minute mark. Like clockwork, we roll out the attendance sheet and march out all together. The next day, he is absolutely livid. He spends 30 minutes of the class literally yelling at us students for leaving and not waiting, threatening to mark our grades, yada yada yada. Most bipolar lunatic to ever be allowed to teach. I have 2 stories from my time in school. The most badass one was at the end of my 7th grade year. It wasn't the students, but the teachers, that did the mass protest. The principal was leaving the school after that school year and the district was in the process of hiring a new principal to start that fall, and the teachers were involved in the hiring process. My uncle was a teacher at the school, and also my neighbor at the time, so I would usually hang out in his classroom after school, and do my homework, until he would drive me home. A few weeks before the end of school there was a staff meeting after school, to announce who the new principal would be. I was sitting in my uncle's classroom during the meeting, when I heard a bunch of yelling, and the teachers storming out of the building. My uncle told me that the school district had hired someone to be the principal that literally every teacher recommended against. The following day I get to school, and it is chaos with everybody in the gym or larger classrooms. 90% of the teachers, the current principal, and office staff all elected to use their vacation time for that day. However, the district still hired that principal, and about half of the teachers did not return that fall because of it. The second story is more funny than anything. My senior year of high school I had a calculus class first thing in the morning. One day someone was complaining about not having time to eat breakfast in the morning due to how early our school started, and someone said they wished we could just have breakfast in class. We decided that on Friday we would do just that. Without talking to the teacher, the class split up who would bring bacon, eggs, milk, orange juice, plates, and silverware, cups, pancake mix, syrup, and an electric griddle. We get to class that morning and just start cooking pancakes and dishing them out. It took the teacher about 10 moments to realize what was going on. It turned into a tradition for about every Friday a month or two before the administration shut us down. I hope this doesn't get lost, because it basically proves little kids are the biggest dickheads on so many levels. Hear me out. I went to a small Catholic French school. We had a grade 7/8 split class, and each grade had only about 10 students. Having spent our entire elementary school as a close-knit group, we were banded as one, and no teacher could divide us. We had a new teacher starting that year, and he could not handle us. It got so bad that the 2 good students complained so much that our school bought our teacher a microphone to talk over the class. I can't make this shit up. He wore a headset to teach his lessons because half of us wouldn't listen. One day, we decided to test how far he could talk through the speaker. He goes into the hallway, and we tell him to go down the hall and see if we can still hear him. He's so amused for whatever reason, and obliges. Well, we closed the door on him the minute he was down the hall, and all we could hear on the speaker was, "Hey, let me back in. I'll go get the principal," etc. etc. We knew he would eventually have to get the principal, making him look bad as a new teacher, but it didn't matter to us, because it took him 10 minutes to decide that was what he had to do. When the principal walked in with him, raging, we were all sitting perfectly nice and still at our desks. She demanded to know who shut the door. Obviously we all stayed silent and won that battle. We had a group of like 6 to 8 kids that were total as. They were smart, but still partied incognito. The teachers loved them, except for the few that saw through them. They loved to mock anyone that asked a question in class and kissed us to get their A's. They also loved to tell on people for cheating, or even make up stuff to get people in trouble. The principal loved these kids as well, so they go away with everything. Anyway, they were in charge of prom and decided that they would sell tickets, but they also sold funny ones to make some money. One kid in particular I really hated. He was a little weasel that reminded me of a Hitler Youth. Once the word got out, people couldn't wait to tell on him. It took a couple weeks for him to actually get in trouble because the principal couldn't believe he would do it. But after he tried to blame all his cronies, they turned on him as well. He and a couple other kids got 10 days suspension and had to pay back the money they stole. After 2 days the principal decided that 10 days was too much and dropped it to 3 days. He would then be able to go to prom. The student body hated this kid so much that we had our class president inform the principal that we were going to have a walkout if he didn't make him do the full 10 days and miss prom. After some threats and blustering, the principal finally gave in and left it at 10 days. Even still, the teachers that loved these kids postponed midterms so that they would not get zeros on them. 10th grade. Our Latin teacher had, according to rumor, at one point ran over a cow in his car, or something like that. For whatever the reason, he was deathly afraid of cows. Apparently, at a previous school he worked at, he broke down crying, locking himself in a closet because the class wouldn't stop mooing. This teacher was also supremely creepy. He would often make too personal comments toward one of the students in class. Occasionally they bordered on sexual. I should mention this was an all-boys school. Anyway, one day this teacher goes on a tangent about life in ancient Rome. So, one student in class asks a question about Roman diet. The teacher gave a brief explanation of what the Romans ate. But the student followed up asking if the Romans ate beef or drank cow's milk. I, honestly, don't remember the teacher's answer other than he specifically refused to say beef or cow. Instead he said meat from that animal. So, the rest of the class started asking him more questions relating to cows in ancient Rome. If I remember correctly, occasionally a student would quietly make a mooing noise and we would all pretend we heard nothing. FYI, the teacher later resigned, years after I graduated, when he was reported for asking a student why he took so long in the bathroom. Specifically, why did it take you so long? Were you molested in there? The year after I graduated high school and started college, there was a school shooting that got my high school nervous, and they started imposing a lot of new security rules. My brother was still in high school and would report the state of affairs to me week by week. Most of the new rules were good, but some were ridiculous. The most absurd new rule was that backpacks were forbidden. Apparently students were expected to go their locker between every class and just carry around their materials such as pencils, pens, calculators, textbooks, notebooks, etc. etc. Classes across the school from your locker? Tough. Still only 5 minutes to get there and back on time. But the loophole was that those giant handbags high school girls carry around were permitted. So guys just started carrying those bags around because screw hand carrying stuff around all day every day. Once the school caught wind of that loophole, they said okay guys, backpacks are permitted, but only if they're clear/transparent. By the way, those giant Vera Bradley style handbags are now forbidden. So now nobody's allowed to use the handbags, and instead everybody is expected to go find +BUY transparent backpacks, I assume they exist, somewhere, and carry all your belongings around for all to see. Eventually this rule was broken, so many times so consistently, that it was eventually dropped. It was at this time that I realized I'm glad to never have to go back and do high school all over again. Our school had a needlessly complex system of 6 days that would run sequentially through the school term. Each of the days was the same except for day 4, which ended slightly earlier, and day 3, which replaced the periods between recess and lunch with a school assembly. Sports day was always on a Wednesday, where the periods after lunch were replaced by sport. When day 3 fell on a Wednesday, it felt like you had hit the jackpot because your day would go double. Period, recess, assembly, lunch, sport. You only had one subject for the whole day. One day, the stars aligned, and day 3 fell on a Wednesday at the start of the year, before anyone had chosen their sports, so everyone could go home after assembly. However, since assembly didn't include a roll call, everyone realized that one student wouldn't be missed. We went home after the second period, missing recess and the rest of the day. And we would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for that meddling vice principal. The assembly was run entirely by the prefects, no teachers at all most of the time. But on this day, the VP decided he needed to make an announcement and quickly realized he was looking at only 1/3 of the whole school. He was not impressed, but you can't just put over 1,000 kids on detention, so he let us off with a good shouting. Not sure if this qualifies, but it's simultaneously one of the most rebellious and nerdiest things I did in HS. Senior year, I get a car. It is a piece of shit that's older than I am, but goddammit it's a car. I get it up and running over the summer, and it has a maximum speed of maybe 30 miles per hour going downhill, but it seats 4. So I start carpooling with 2 friends in the mornings. I get about a week in, and halfway to the school, I find that the accelerator no longer causes vroom. Now, my car had some stalling problems that were caused by the air hose between the carburetor and air filter. It was that old, falling off. I secured it better and found that this problem was caused by the hose blowing out entirely. Well, shit. Friend with cell calls my dad. I tell him what happens. He comes and gets us, and we are 45 minimums late to our 90-minute first block. We go to the office. They tell us that it'll count as an unexcused absence and to go to ICE until second block. I argue that my car broke down. My dad called, and they were my passengers, and they were steadfastly refusing to listen. I took my slip, as did my 2 friends, and I don't know who it was, but one of said, you know what? Fuck this, I'm going to class, and the other 2 agreed. So we went to class and explained to the teachers, and all of them agreed to let us in. Car got repaired after a week of not driving, and it served us well for most of the rest of the semester, until it died permanently. Ooh, or yes they can, sweetie. I once lived on a small military base where the middle school and high school were combined to make a school of approximately 500 students. This one year, we had a new assistant principal, who everyone, even the teachers, hated her. So we kids did the one thing we could do to passively protest her existence and piss her off. We all started coming in late to school, and from lunch or break. School morale just hit rock bottom because of her terrible attitude and extensive name taking. The principal understood our side, since he hated her and her unwanted sexual advances towards him, but he had to follow the rules. The week before spring break, the school began to list off the names of students who had earned breakfast club invitations, and we were told to form a line at the office door, stay against the walls, and do not block the doors. It took an hour and a half for the office to read nearly everyone's name in the school. Only 3 students out of nearly 500 had not earned breakfast club invites. Some had only 30 minutes, other had accumulated over 24 hours worth of detention in about 4 months. This day went down in local history as the first time the entire school was given detention. After that, our hatred for her increased as well as our pranks, but because she was the one in hot water for her behavior through parent and faculty complaints and evaluations, the school never had another massive breakfast club while I was living there. Okay, so I'm late to the party, but this is how we almost got our drama teacher fired and almost gave 20+ students a month of ice. So basically one of the girls in our drama class is married. Army guy, I think. The point is that she was 17 and a junior, but her husband was away on deployment and she really wanted to go to homecoming. So her and another girl decided to take one of the special ed kids. He attended a lot of regular classes, but had to do a couple of special ed classes because he was like super mega autistic. So she comes to the drama room, which is just our English teacher's room, because she was also the drama teacher, and pleads with us to do something special for him, because he never went to a homecoming dance with a date before. So we all agree to do a flash mob during lunch. It didn't work out. Since we had just finished the play for the year, we didn't have a lot to do, so we decided to do it just for fun. So for about 2 weeks we choreograph how we are going to do it, and the plan of execution. Then the day comes. 2 students controlling the sound system wait outside while the drama class slowly filters into the first lunch period. Then it happens. The 2 kids run in blasting party rock anthem, which is the kids' favorite song, while all of the drama kids in unison start dancing to it. Right before the 2 girls were going to ask him to homecoming, the principal and 2 assistant principals rush in and start yelling at us to turn off the music. We all get forced back into our class and get a very harsh talking to about how we might inspire a riot and how other students might think it's acceptable and how we were a distraction. Yeah, we totally distracted people from eating food and that it won't be tolerated. Cut to the next day and we get in drama and our teacher is crying because she may very well be forced to shut down the drama program because of it. We weren't very happy about it, so we did what any sensible class would do and stuffed ourselves in the front office and principal's office and refused to leave until they assured us that they wouldn't cut out the drama program, which in hindsight was a pretty dumb thing to do because it cold made things a whole lot worse. For any of you wondering, he did end up going to homecoming with both of the chicks, but ended up getting bored halfway through and leaving without telling either of them, and basically left them dateless at dance, which is pretty faking low. Back in HS, there was a group of us who used to hang out in a small corridor type hall, the smokers. The principal was new and looking to make a point, so he'd walk every day, and if one student stepped into the doorway blocking the flow, even accidentally, he'd give them detention immediately. This went on a few days before we'd had enough. Student who had never smoked or even spoken to any of us started coming around in the morning to purposely stand in the middle or this pathway to prove a point. Now I was that kid who never gave a teacher any grief, and while a smoker, did my best to stay under the radar and just do my thing, but this day I seemed to get swept up in the middle of it all. The principal came around to do his stare down and noticed a sizable chunk of student chatting away, so he started pulling the known smokers, but leaving the others alone. There was outrage, teenage angst at its finest, and everyone was hollering at him, and he was yelling back. Finally he snapped and said, "Fine. Who would like to go home for the day then?" To which all of us, without hesitation, raised our hands. Like 30 student. He sat there flabbergasted and left. He made a point of singling out the ringleaders in an announcement and stated all sorts of info on these 5 students like missed classes, late classes and whole missed days. Named them and everything. By the end of that period at least 50 students had gathered because of how he'd singled out those kids, and when he came down to see what was happening we swore we wouldn't move until he formally apologized to them. A few angry words exchanged later, he came back to the P-pointer system and publicly apologized to those students. He ended up finishing the year and then switched to a different school. Not sure if that caused it or some school board thing, but still, it was a wild day for everyone involved. Not a very good one, but one sports carnival day with school. When I was 14, my friends and I were bored, so we orchestrated our escape. Small town. It was my first and only ever bad behavior at and attempt to be wagging school. Ditching for the USA readers. We all timed it for when the majority of teachers on the grounds were distracted and scattered, and took off in opposite directions as we were at the sports oval close to the school fenced multi-sport complex, and I had the clever idea of hiding behind the stables harness racing course at the grounds also, till the teachers quit searching that area, and then climbed the fence and booked it for the rendezvous. At my friend's house some 5 kilometers away. My friend's parents both worked full-time. Out of 8 kids 5 got away and 3 got caught. I got away and had a fun afternoon hanging out with my buddies till mum picked me up. I'd never been in so much trouble in my life. Grounded for a month, loads of additional chores and extra homework to make up for my disrespect of my teachers. The adventure was worth it. The kids that were caught took it on the chin. They were good sports. We were waiting outside our locked classroom door one day, and we knew that we had a substitute teacher that day. So instead of just waiting, this girl Melanie went around the other side of the classroom, walked through the garden, and climbed through the open window. Then she let us all into the classroom. We wrote a note saying that our class should go to the library and stuck it on the outside of the door. Then we shut the door, which was still locked from the outside. The substitute teacher came, but I guess she didn't have a key. She knocked on the door and rattled on the handle, but our entire class stayed silent inside. Then the substitute teacher left, I assume following our fake note to check the library, where of course she didn't find us, since we were sneakily hiding inside our actual classroom. We stayed in there for the rest of the session, mostly just whispering to each other, or writing notes to each other, not doing any work the whole time. Then it was lunchtime, so we just left. The next day our regular teacher was back and asked us all where we were. She was cool, so we told her the truth. Luckily she laughed, and we didn't get into any trouble. November of 2000, I was in 11th grade. Because of the post-Columbine shooting scare, my high school decided to have a code red drill, which simulated a gunman on campus. During the drill, which was scheduled during our break between classes, students were supposed to duck and cover. A group of friends and I decided that the whole thing was ridiculous. By our 16-year-old logic, if someone was on campus and shooting at students, ducking and covering was a great way to get shot. Especially since it was a little rainy, so half the people were carrying brightly colored umbrellas, which made excellent targets. We decided to peacefully protest the drill. Rather than ducking and covering, we'd get out of the area in an orderly fashion, similar to how we were supposed to calmly walk out during fire drills. While the rest of the school was cowering behind their umbrellas, we marched in an orderly fashion across campus. Because we were dumb teenagers, a few things didn't enter our calculations. About half of us were wearing black trench coats. The start of our route took us right past the windows of the teacher's lounge. The assistant principal hated our group. The assistant principal interpreted our peaceful protest as a threat and gave all of us 5 days suspension. Senior year of high school, we had a new tardiness policy. If you were late, you were swept down the hallway with all other tardy students, where your name was recorded and your punishment assigned. On 3+ trips to the sweeps room, this was detention. These accumulated across all subjects for the entire semester, so many of us hit 3 in the first week. What struck me as absurd about this rule is it took a very long time to process this many students. There was a single person recording every name and writing every hall pass. This was so time consuming that, if you were late first period, as many of us of course were, it would take 30+ minutes to get to class. On a side note, the punishment for skipping was less than that of a repeat offender in the tardiness program, so I missed a lot more classes because of this. Once I realized how inefficient this process was, I decided to try to break it. I decided on 5th period on a Thursday and started telling everyone to be late a week ahead of time. The day came, and the hallways were packed. No one was allowed back in class without hall passes, but there was no way to write them all. After about 15 minutes of hallways filled with milling students and confused teachers, the principal got on the loudspeaker and announced that the tardiness policy would not be enforced that period, and everyone should get back to class immediately. Not one detention was given that hour, but I got suspended for a week. Okay, so this isn't an all-story senior year of high school. One day in ceramics class, the group of dumbers were being more dumb than usual and decided to throw clay balls at the ceiling while the teacher wasn't looking/busy. Side note, teacher was really old, really out of it, and really naive. It continued for a while. Everyone saw that they were doing it, and it wasn't like it was completely quiet, so they were laughing and being obnoxious. It didn't pertain to me, and I honestly didn't give two sheets. But about 10 minutes before the bell rang, the teacher, finally faking, noticed the clay balls on the ceiling. She got pissed, yelling, screaming the works. She wanted to know who did it, and no one was saying anything. And of course the dumbers didn't take responsibility. She threatened us all with detention and said that she would be keeping us after the bell until whoever did it fessed up. No one was saying anything still, so since I ain't no snitch, I told her I did it. The mayo, the look on their faces, man. I mean, I was the quiet girl in the back of the class that no one really knew or really talked to that actually did ceramics. Shocker. I'm pretty sure no one had actually heard my voice before the teacher asked if I really did it, and I just said yes. Disbelief ensued. The bell rang and she said we could all go. Didn't even hold me back to talk or anything. It never came back up again. I just really wanted to get to fuck in class, man. Dumbass. TLDR, dumbers did dumbers things, which I took the fall for and made it to class on time. A little late, but I think this is a good one. Cue normal high school setting 5 years ago in rural cornfield America. There's that one teacher who is very old and has a finger in everything and basically can't be fired because of her various roles. This teacher is in charge of pep rallies, and our students didn't quite enjoy this fact when she disqualified the seniors from winning any future rallies that year because of a skit they did in a class competition earlier that year. The skit was barely worthy of disqualification at the event, yet alone all future events. Add that onto a list of things students already disliked her for, and you have a very hated teacher. At the next rally, the senior class came up with a brilliant plan to get back at her. Mrs. G, as I'll refer to her, starts to address the senior class about something. Cue acts of defiance. The senior class as a whole simultaneously pull out newspapers. This was quite impressive as I didn't think there were many people at our school who would go out of their way to organize such an act in a class of 100. They just cross their legs and put their heads in the newspapers. She starts calling out specific people to come down to help her with the task we were going to do for the rally, but those people weren't budging. She gives up and starts trying to get another class to do the task, but no one moved. Suddenly everyone knew that we weren't taking any more sheet from this teacher. One by one, every student turns away from her. The good kids, the bad kids, straight A students, the regular detention attendees, and even the good Samaritans who never spoke foul. I've never laughed so much at an act of defiance before, or at the look of rage on someone else's face. I swear she aged a couple years after this event.